Dr. Aguilar, do you have any opening comments, sir?
No, sir.
I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Hefner then, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. Good seeing you again. What we're going to do today is continue some of our discussions with regards to the comprehensive rezoning plan. Last time that we met, we were working with the 2015-2016 enrollments, but we did not have the schools of choice, programs of choice numbers that were parsed out because I didn't have the codes at that time. We do have those now for the 2016-2017. So we're going to be refining our numbers a little bit more. So we're going to walk through this. I'm going to kind of start where we were and then pick it up from there. What I do want to at least start is kind of, particularly for those that may be in the audience that weren't here or watching at the last one, is what the objectives are. And we basically, no particular order, have 11 objectives or so that are identified that we would do with this project. One is to rebalance school population, fully utilize existing classroom seats, provide relief for overcrowded schools, provide for future growth in our student population changes, develop the attendance zone for the new Southside High School, and that's kind of what's been generating a lot of this. Reduce the number of split attendance zones. As you recall, we have 50 right now. Reduce the number of split grade levels. Be cognizant of the at-risk populations at each school, reduce the ride time for students where they're riding a bus, and reduce the number of buses where possible, and trying to use major waterways, roadways, primary roads, railroads, those kinds of things, instead of cutting through and using residential streets, subdivision streets as a boundary. So those are the things that we're trying to do. And also we're going to maintain the district school of choice options. So those that are in the school of choice program now, this doesn't affect them. So this is mostly to set up the attendance zones. I'm going to go ahead and start with the elementary. And what I want to do is take the elementary plan that I discussed with y'all back in the summer, which was based on the 2015 numbers. I took that plan and I updated it with the 2016 numbers and made the adjustments for the schools of choice. So now you'll see Leo, Judice in there, J. Wallace James, and Myrtle Place. Those numbers now have been taken out of all the other districts and assigned to those 3 schools that serve the parish overall on the elementary level. Also, those students that are involved in any of the world language programs, those are all been assigned to the school that they're attending for French immersion and those things, such as Prairie's French immersion, as an example. The numbers that you see on the screen, the top number is the school code. That's what I use for my my system. That's what it reads. Of course, the middle line is the name of the school. The bottom number are the number of students based on your September 12th or so student database that you had at the time, adjusted for those changes with schools of choice and whatnot. It does not include ESA transfers, special ed transfers, employee transfers, those kinds of things, because they weren't coded in to the database. It also doesn't include transfers from the state school choice program, where if you had a D or an F school and you have that option to move to a qualifying school outside of your zone, those changes aren't in there either. So they're actually counted in their residential zone. So these numbers are those students that live within that geographic area. For example, Austin has 659, Dusant 250, Westside 627, Burke 574. So this is what the plan we talked about last time with the new numbers. And in looking at it, of course, Drexel is still a big hot spot, as we talked about last time. I was hoping that we had more students going to other schools in the Drexel zone that would have brought that number down, but there weren't enough. You still have, under this plan, 1,300 students going to Drexel, which Drexel can't handle that many students. We also have another issue, another hot spot with regards to S.J. Montgomery. S.J. Montgomery has 778 under Plan 1, which is too high. They don't have that kind of capacity to be able to handle that number of students. And part of that is because it has to absorb some of the old Myrtle Place zone. When that zone was collapsed and made into a French immersion campus, you no longer had a zone for Myrtle. So S.J. Montgomery is one of them that picked up that zone. 778 for Montgomery. West Side is also a bit of a hot spot in that it's got 627, and they generally need to get around the 500, 550 range. Those are the ones that really were somewhat of a problematic. The two that have gotten some discussion here lately has been Boucher and Falk, and those numbers are probably overstated because we're not including the transfers over the last several years of those students that have opted to take that state school choice option. So while I may show 874 living geographically within the Falk zone, probably there's 150 or so that are probably attending school elsewhere with our neighboring schools. They could be at Woodvale, they could be at Plantation, they could be at Evangeline. If we can get those codes, and I think Tom Spencer's trying to put those numbers together so we can at least make a manual adjustment on it. Boucher is the same thing, because we had some times where Boucher, those parents qualified to have their child go to a different school under that state school choice program. So those two numbers are probably overstated some, but unfortunately what's probably not overstated in particular, which was kind of the big headache, is Drexel. Now the problem with Drexel is we need to reduce the zone. I love the lines. The lines are really clean. Problem is it puts too many students in Drexel. And so that's what kind of started generating Plan 2 on the elementary level, is how do we go about making those adjustments for Drexel and to some degree West Side and Montgomery. Those are those areas that I was trying to make some adjustments with. What you see in the heavy blue line or purple line is Plan 2, which was sent to y'all a couple of days ago. It shows you, it outlines where some of the changes are. For example, Drexel under Plan 2 has about 771 kids. You can see right here that this part of the Drexel zone has been assigned to GT Linden. See, under Plan 2, this heavy outline right here, that's the GT Linden zone. This line here is the Galette zone. This line here is Plantation. I don't have too many schools to work with in that area. It's in the corner of the parish. So if I'm going to reduce those students, I either send them back up to Falk, or add them to Plantation, add them to Galette, add them to GT, or try to divide them up primarily between Plantation, Galette, and Linden, and try to keep everybody around the 700, 800 mark if we can. The plan still puts Galette a little on the high side. It's the same school design as J. Wallace James, and J. Wallace James has 900 and some odd kids assigned to it, 932. Galette can probably handle that, as I understand from staff, and that is where staff has gotten involved. As I've worked through different scenarios, I've asked the superintendent and Mr. Craig to take a look at the numbers and see if those facilities will fit, because I don't have a functional capacity number for each of the schools. I'd requested a year or so ago. They sent me some information, but so much of it was missing, I couldn't work with it. So as we go through here, I'm bringing staff in with regards to whether they can take these numbers or not. I knew they told me they couldn't take 1,300 at Drexel. So here you'll see Linden picking up to part of the Drexel zone, Galette picking back up some of what it currently has now. Galette actually went all the way up to where the line is up here, which you see with the cursor. Galette used to wrap all the way up around behind Plantation. So some of that area now is going to Plantation, which I think is appropriate because Plantation's a lot closer and you don't have a lot of that traffic heading south. So I assigned part of this to Plantation, so that brought Plantation to 861 from 595. Going to Galette has 930 under Plan 2, where it had 729 under Plan 1, which was great. I like that because it actually gave us a little bit of growth. And Linden is 830, whereas before was at 763. So all of those three schools are having to pick up some of that load from Drexel, which brings Drexel down to 771, which is a number that they can handle, as I understand. So That was some of the main changes on the elementary side on the east end of the parish. Milton, no change. Plantation had that particular change. Let's talk a little bit about Montgomery. Montgomery was at 778, which was too high. Woodvale was at 453, which meant it could pick up some students. So I went ahead under Plan 2 and just continued following the middle line of Congress all the way down to Ambassador Caffrey. And at any time you want to see the streets on, I can turn them on.
Isn't that Gilbo Road?
That's Gilbo, I'm sorry. Yeah, Ambassador's right here. Sometimes I get mixed up on this stuff.
I didn't want anybody to get the wrong impression.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So it's following Congress to Gilbo and Gilbo to Johnson. That section in here, and this is coming in off of Foreman?
Arnold Boulevard.
Arnold Boulevard. That's what we used as a dividing line because it was a boulevard. It was a good one to use. Let me put my street names on here real quick. And by the way, I do want to recognize that Lafayette Consolidated Government provides me with the updated street maps. So we're using and including all the new subdivision streets and whatnot and their addresses. So City Parish Government has been very helpful with providing these the street files to me. It just makes everything a lot more accurate. So anyway, this area here has been assigned, that's in this heavy purple line, over to Woodvale, which brought Woodvale to 588. And it brought Montgomery down to 673. That's the small numbers, the smaller typeface is Plan 2. The larger one is Plan 1. So as you're looking at it, that's how making the changes. Also, we took a little bit from Montgomery as Ambassador Caffrey came around and came up to Cameron Street from Galbert Road. A lot of that's industrial, but we do have some houses on these side streets coming off of Cameron. I went ahead and assigned that over to Prairie. Prairie had 476. This brings them up to 556. So Prairie Zone used to go up to Old Colony. Now we're going to follow Ambassador Caffrey under this scenario, and we're going to pick up a little bit of the Montgomery Zone, bring those numbers down, and a little bit of the West Side numbers to bring those numbers down. Because West Side, I don't have a lot of options either. So this change in Prairie brings Prairie to 556 and brings West Side to 558, and that's part of the total number for Montgomery at 673. Burke, not a lot of change other than we picked up basically from Rue de Bellier, actually from where it goes to a two-lane coming off of Rue de Bellier. We picked up both sides of West Congress and assigned that to Burke rather than the center line. I talked with some of the bus drivers there that run that route on that street, and they've never had any safety issues. Part of the problem I want to make sure is that we're not setting a line up where we have a really busy street where there's a tendency for drivers to ignore the stop arms for the buses and blow past the buses, and they haven't had any issues in that area. So I felt okay on doing that. Okay. We did make another little minor change, and actually it was just a matter of block boundaries. Mill Street coming on Austin generally had both sides of Mill were going to Austin except for the last mile or so. And I made some changes in the latest plan that actually picks up all of Mill Street, both sides of Mill Street, the entire length, keeps it over in Austin. So we made that change, and actually that keeps those students going where they're going right now. And let's see what other options that we looked at here. I think that's pretty much the crux of it there. Biggest one though was trying to work out the Drexel Montgomery West Side area, and that's about the major extent of that, other than maybe a little bit of cleanup. Do y'all have any questions on it so far? And we can always come back to it a little later. If you want, I can walk you through the middle school and then to the high school. and then I can pull up the actual Plan 2 if y'all want to look at any numbers. Okay? All right, let's go ahead and let me close that out. I'll pull up the middle school. Okay, this is our middle school plan. It was Plan 2 with the middle school back in the summer. This is the numbers with the schools of choice. Basically, with this one, we had the academy over at Alamo and the STEM program over at Thibodaux. Those were the two primary ones that we coded for on that. As you'll see, Scott came down to 387. Because all this area north of the interstate that used to go, some of the grade levels used to go from there to Scott, are now going to Karen Crow. So we're still trying to use where we can I-10 as the boundary. Karen Crow's at 693, that's okay. Acadian's 348, probably a little tad on the low side. Scott's really low. Scott used to have 1,100 students at one time. That's at 387 under this scenario. 409 for Judy's, which is comfortable. Lafayette Middle, 562. Paul Bro, again, I think we're going to run into the same situation that we did with Falk and Boucher, and that number's probably overstated some. Alamo, you'll see the numbers are really high, but that's because you have a lot of students there that go to the academy. It's not so much the zone students taking up that number, it's the students attending the academy over at Alamo. And that's what's pumping those numbers up. Edgar Martin 572, Youngsville 580, and Broussard 494. So those are the numbers that we had at that time. And looking at the second plan, the heavy line is Plan 2 on the middle school level, version 2. It uses Johnson Street as the dividing line between Edgar Martin and Scott Middle. What I was trying to do is trying to get the numbers up for Scott and getting the numbers reasonable for Edgar Martin. Let me 1 second, I'm going to get these labels up for you. Name and 6-8. All right. This change here uses Johnson Street. These kids now would all go to Prairie. They would all go to, of course, West Side, and they'd all go to Scott, and then they would all go to Acadiana. So it eliminates one of the splits that we had earlier with Plan 1. It brings Scott's numbers up to 535. Now, some of this, too, is because we had a grade realignment. We're moving the 5th graders back to West Side. So that kind of aggravated West Side's numbers a little bit because they're getting 5th graders back and Scott's losing some. So that's part of the problem driving some of the number disparity. But anyway, this brings it up to 535, 6 through 8 with that scenario. Lafayette Middle is from 562 to 561, very little minor change up in this area. This area here is probably the biggest change that we have under the middle school. If we take it out and go to Plan 1, it's going to bring Scott to 380, roughly 387 to 400, and Edgar Martin 572 to probably 600 in that neighborhood if we keep it as it is. If we change it, Edgar Martin goes to 425, Scott goes to 535. Nothing material in any of the other areas under the middle school plan. Alamo did not change. Alamo still stays at 970. I didn't change any of the boundary lines there.
Mr. Heflin.
Yes.
Can you explain, I don't want to say the rationale, but was there any thought given to, I know the Alamo line is moving from the river to Verrott School Road. Broussard seems, I guess the question is, how many students can Broussard hold? Because it seems like there's a big disparity between Alamo and Broussard.
Yeah, biggest problem in Alamo is not so much a geographic zone, but the...
And I guess the question is going to be, how many kids did we pick up moving from the river to Verrott zoned, as opposed to Because, I mean, I think we all know the temporary building
Okay.
situation at Alamo.
Okay, if you'll hold on to that question until I get to switching to Plan 2, where I can actually pull up those numbers, I'll be happy to figure those out for you.
Thank you.
Because it's been a while since I looked at those, so. But either Don or Joe can probably give me a hand on what the capacity is between, for Broussard Middle. So just hold on to that thought, for in case I forget. Any other questions on that? If not, I'll show you the high school, which is not that drastic. All right, this is the high school 2A. This is what the plan was with the numbers. Karen Crowe 1110, Acadiana 1676, 2170 for Lafayette High, 1300 for Como, and 1029 for Southside, 1684 for Northside. Again, Northside may be a little overstated because of state school choice options they may have elected in the past. Let's take a look at the high school plan 2, which I believe I have in here somewhere. If not, I'll pull them up on the let me just go ahead and pull it up on the other plan. Okay, this is our high school plan here. Make some little adjustments. Make that look a little better. The biggest change that we had with the high school is picking up the area. Turn my streets on here. We picked up the area. Originally, the line was at Ambassador Caffrey for Lafayette High, and in order to try to get Lafayette High down a little bit more, this area was assigned. That part of Edgar Martin that was split previously under Plan 1 was reassigned over to Como. That's really the only change that we had on the high school one. Everything else was roughly the same, following what we had before. Let me get these. Get these numbers up for you. Okay. All right. The numbers here showing with the high school 1300 and Lafayette High at 2170, and I'm not sure if I pulled up that right layer on that. Those are the original zones as they are now, so you can see where the changes took place with Southside coming in, taking virtually that whole bottom half of the Como zone. And this is really what's driving a lot of these line changes, is that Southside came in, took in Como. Como then had to go pick up somewhere. The only place to go pick up is over at Lafayette High, which was taking in this whole area here, or come up more into Northside. Already it was up into Northside some. So it would have to literally come up to the backyard in Northside. So that was the things that were driving it. And that's what you saw in Plan 1. Give me 1 second here. Let me check something out. Yep, okay. May have overwrote that particular file. But that area that we just discussed is the main change that we had here with Como. Let me do something here real quick. Get to the file I originally set up for this. Let's see if I have it. Yeah, there it is right there. This area here on the high school plan was the area that was reassigned from Lafayette High to Como. That's a big difference between 1 and 2. And it was a couple hundred students that moved, so it brought those numbers down. Let me get those numbers up for you. Okay. So under this scenario, Lafayette High comes down to 1681. Como goes up to 1456. 1337 at North Side, 1110 at Karen Crow. KDN has 1676, so that's generally what we're looking at. But that's the thing I mostly wanted to get to you, was the change in the high school was this particular area here.
Mr. Hefner, I have a question. Do you know the capacity? I know you mentioned earlier you weren't the capacity for Karen Crow, since we only have 1,100 assigned there.
Yeah, Karen Crow probably has a capacity of what, close to 1,400. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's still going to be have some underutilization.
Would it?
This is putting the Information Technology Academy students assigning them to Karen Crow, so that includes those numbers.
So maybe we could move the Como High zone a little north and let Karen Crow absorb some of the north side zone. I mean,
I did kind of, and the problem comes in with the middle school level. Maybe using Gloria Switch for the line, and maybe coming all the way across to the parish line and putting this area into Karen Crow, which would bring that up. That would take out, I don't think there's a whole lot of students right there. Let me see what we got.
And this isn't, this obviously is not anywhere near my district, and I'm asking more from the standpoint of we only get the opportunity to balance out the schools through major rezoning once in a lifetime, it appears. So yeah, maybe we should use this lifetime as an opportunity to try to balance that out a little more.
Yeah, what you would be looking at doing is jumping across the thruway or the railroad tracks that are
I'll let you, I'll let you do the where the balancing occurs. I just think that we should.
Yeah, I looked at doing this. It just starts cutting it off here. If we were going to keep the middle school zone intact and not split it, then it was going to bring Acadian down even more, because I was going to be taking out a chunk of Acadian. I also was going to take a chunk out of Evangeline in that area. But when you're doing these things, they tend to have a domino effect. You make a move in one area, you got a corresponding move in one or more areas. Depends on it. Drexel's a good example. We had a move that we had to bring it down, but it wasn't just one school; it was 3 schools that were involved.
And maybe the solution is more of a school of choice. If we consider a future school of choice, that we put it there instead of any of the other schools. That could be the solution instead.
That's generally what we've done in the past. That's actually how Alamo got started in '86, and we're down less than 300 students that lived in the zone. We put the academy over there to get that started, and boom, probably 2/3 of the enrollment now is academy students. But certainly something, I can go back and take a look at. I looked at it early on when I was working at Plan 2, and that's some of the issues I was running into, trying to keep those zones intact and yet still keep those numbers up. This whole thing has basically been a roll-up. If you want to just visualize the dynamics, is that the south part of the parish is heavy on student population. The central and north part is heavy on population, so basically it's been kind of a roll-up of trying to assign more students to those schools in the central and then in the north part of the parish than we have in the south. That way it tries to relieve some of the south, but there's only so much you can do unless you start really going in and cutting through neighborhoods and doing what we've been doing over the years, which really is problematic. So here we're still using our major roads. I would have loved to use I-10 all the way across, but that was another example where the numbers didn't work. Falk would have been way too heavy. Evangelists needed the numbers. I mean, we may even still need to make an adjustment on that as we look through this, because only got the data 10 days ago. I guess it takes a while to program all this in, and then we've been looking at some variations since then. I don't want anybody to think that it's set in stone, but there's been a lot of analysis that's going on with me on trying to balance all of these out while still trying to hold true to some of the objectives that we're doing. So I don't want to say that we're not open to looking at other scenarios. If you have suggestions, then I certainly would like to hear them, because more than one head working together generally works better. But by and large, these three plans tend to try to hold to the objectives that we had discussed early on to try to rebalance the population and make the best use of the facilities. From a transportation standpoint, I think the 1 and 2 is going to greatly simplify your transportation right now. I know schools of choice and those things are already problematic, but you had a lot of problems with just your residential school bus routes. You actually should be able to save some money on the routing. If the routing is approached properly, you should be able to save some significant money on your routing, from what I see. Because as I'm drawing these lines, I'm keeping that in the back of my mind as far as how would buses route through to go pick up these students and get them over to the school, as well as getting them back home. So that has been one of the things that we've kept in mind. So those are the three plans that we have: middle, elementary, and high school under Plan 2. And I understand, you know, parents, they get upset when you talk about rezoning. And that's probably the reason why we probably haven't tackled it since the late 1990s, other than some spot rezoning. But there comes a time when you've got to make some changes in order to fully utilize your schools. It's really hard to justify to the taxpayers that may or may not have kids in schools why you want to put all this money into new facilities when you already have a significant investment in other facilities that are being underutilized. But even with this effort, you can see that we still have some issues. It's still heavy on the south end. It's better in the central part. It's still a tad light on the north end. There's only so much you can do right now as far as making those movements. So, Eric, what you were talking about with programming, it does open up that door for it, in my opinion. Now, no, Mr.
Mr. Hefner, in listening to your analysis of South Lafayette as it relates to not enough schools and the difficulty with Drexel in particular, so we are in the process of presumably building a new Catherine Drexel, and one of the things we were concerned about was the budget for that project based on the bonding capacity of the district. So we had subsequently began to really brainstorm about keeping the original Drexel facility open, but use it for pre-K through first grade as an early childhood center. The new Catherine Drexel would be second grade through fifth grade. But in thinking about the difficulties, particularly with the large number of elementary students, in my opinion, it would make better sense if we left the Catherine Drexel open as a K-5 a school and then use the bonding capacity to build a new elementary school in South Lafayette. It would ideally potentially serve the Broussard community well. Right now we have 3,376 students attending those 4 elementary schools. But if we had a fifth elementary school in that same area, the population, if you divided them equally, would be 675 students per site. I think in my mind it would be better, knowing we need seat capacity in South Lafayette, for the board to really consider not just replacing Drexel, but building a new elementary school in the Broussard area, keeping Drexel open, and really, for the near future, having sufficient seat capacity for elementary students.
That probably would help, depending on where you located it. But now we have student data programmed into here. That's something that we could actually model to see how it would work out if you wanted to split that zone.
Looking at the map, and Joe Craig helping me plot where our 16th section property is, it's right on the edge of the Linden zone as proposed. Building that new elementary school on that 16th section property, dividing that Drexel population, and then making adjustments to the other zones. And that's just one idea about location. It could also be in Broussard proper. We still have not yet secured land for that new school. So it would give us the opportunity not just to replace a building, and rightfully so, Drexel is a very old facility, but it would give us tremendous additional seat capacity.
Yeah, it would. And of course, you may recall several years ago we had some scenarios drawn up by the UL Architecture Department on making that 16th section in South Youngsville area an educational complex for elementary, middle, and high school.
Absolutely. And one of the things board members this would do is we've had talks about a wing for plantation. We've never really been able to secure lockdown funding, the necessary funding. If we built a new elementary school, we could relieve the need for that wing at Plantation. Just in one event, we could save the use of many temporary buildings at those schools.
Yeah, we can model out a zone. I do that with some school districts when they're looking at trying to relieve overcrowded schools. Is we'll build a model zone to help with a site location or where they need to put the school. So that's something that if you want to do that at some point down the road, I'm more than happy to help you with that, because we got the data in there, so it's not hard to model that. All right, let me get to Mr. Santani's question.
I have several others.
Not surprised.
I'm sure you foresaw that.
Yes, I did. That's all you need, is to see a program that can generate numbers, right?
Mr. President. Yeah. While Mr. Hefner's getting ready, I just wanted to respond to Dr. Aguilar. I agree that we probably need new elementary schools in several places, and Broussard's probably one of them. One of my concerns, though, is that we've been accustomed to and tolerate. Evangeline, I think, is probably the prime example. We have been accustomed to and tolerate that 2 out of every 3 classrooms at Evangeline is a temporary facility, to the point where we're now zoning for that capacity. So we are zoning and accepting that it is okay that 2/3 of this school is not really a school, it's a trailer park. It was supposed to be there temporarily. It's been there for decades. And Mr. Angel brought up at our last meeting that he was hesitant, and sorry to use your words, but I mean he was hesitant basically to fund something else somewhere else when we continue to tolerate that we have these temporary facilities. And again, to the point where here we are today talking about zoning to fill those seats. And it is what it is. That is what we have. But if we're going to look at building new facilities, whether it's new elementary schools or any new facilities, I would rather us look at it as a holistic approach where we can see where are the facility needs. Yes, there's a facility need for a new elementary school. You could pick a spot in the parish and we would have that need. I mean, Broadmoor is another example. I mean, I know that's my district, but you could build a new Broadmoor and fill it up tomorrow if you got rid of the temporary buildings. So I think we would like to know from that holistic approach, where else do we have needs to build facilities?
Yes, sir. I've been working with some local architects. In fact, we have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow. The thought is that we would ask some of the local architectural firms to really help us go out and look at our facilities and really develop a master plan for building wings, eliminating temporary buildings, and at the same time building out the core service areas for those schools so that we're not serving lunch at 10 in the morning until 1:30 in the afternoon. We've got that on the to-do list to try to come back to the board with a clear vision of what it would look like to dramatically remove temporary buildings at our schools by building wings to accommodate the necessary population. And incidentally, if we are thinking wisely, then we do not need funds for a plantation wing. Evangeline is a classical example of a school that needs help from this community. It's possible that there would be some bonding capacity to really do something at Evangeline to demonstrate a commitment by the board.
Thank you.
Mr. President, while he's still doing that, what is the intended process? Because I do have questions as well for Mr. Hefner, but I'd like to know what the process is going to look like. Are we going to leave here with not a vote, but a additional recommendations possibly, or what's the process tonight?
Well, I think it's an open process. We can do that. We can leave here with a general consensus that the plan 2 or 3 or whatever it is okay. We can leave with the first plan was okay. I mean, it's up to us.
Okay.
But you're right. We're not going to make any definitive vote tonight. In fact, I think we've arranged it for November the 6th, or am I correct?
November 2nd. However, members of the board, it's pretty clear that we still, even Mr. Hefner has acknowledged, we still have some work to do to firm up the numbers. We have ample time between today's meeting and November 2nd, if necessary, to have an additional board workshop to look at version 3 of the maps. I think that would be appropriate because we really want, as we get to November 2nd, we want the public to really feel confident the maps are in their nearest final form so that parents can do their due diligence and study the maps. So if you guys are able, it would not be inappropriate to schedule an additional workshop.
I don't think it's out of the question. I mean, I don't think there's nothing wrong with having another workshop. Mike brought it out. It's been years and years and years since we've done something this all-encompassing, if you will, and more than one workshop would be okay with me to try to tweak it where we get to what those 11 or 12 objectives that you mentioned, Mike.
Correct.
I want to point out on the other side of the gavel, but the Chaplin Drexel is an old school. It was built back in the 60s, and so was Carindale Heights, built about the same time. And the other thing I might want to point out is that if we build another school, would we call it Broussard Elementary? I'm just kidding.
When we decide to build it, we're going to name it that night.
Judy's Elementary.
We can name it Judy's Primary. But just to follow what y'all are saying, I've got El Leo Judy's that was built in the 50s. I've got Prairie that has more portable buildings in it or equal portable to permanent. And I've got Ridge also. So I think we all have an area of need. But, I mean, I know El Leo is just as old as, Mr. Elroy, just as old as Truman, huh? Truman and El Leo should be about the same age. Yeah, I think El Leo was 52 or 54. So, I mean, I think we all have needs in our districts. But, Mr. Hidalgo, you can take the name Judy's for a school in Broussard if you would like.
Oh, great. Well, that's Miss Morris. And Mr. President, I want to say that y'all bring up a very, very good point. To my point exactly. If we start focusing on using the bonding capacity we have to replace Butler buildings and do things that feel good to the community, then whose area, whose project, whose area? the true need is not that the school was built in the 60s and needs to be replaced. The true need is that the school is full and more people are still moving into the community. So that's where I'm at that's the side of the issue I'm on. It's not about replacing the school. It's not about replacing Butler buildings. I've made that clear. I do not want to use our bonding capacity for replacing Butler buildings. That's what additional revenue would be used for, in my opinion.
Yes, sir.
And I can understand what you're saying, but building a new Drexel is building a new school. What are you going to, I mean, the old one's going to go just K-1. And remember, I think this flood that happened on the south side, I think it's going to slow the growth on that side of town. It's going to slow it here in the near future. So, but I mean, we have needs, you know, in our districts also, for growth. We're growing also. So, just to feed off of that.
Mr. Centeni?
Did I see your numbers correctly? 60?
60 in grades 6 through 8 in that area
Jeez.
highlighted in red.
Wow.
Now,
I don't know if anybody was paying attention to what he was doing, but it's really neat. If you have any questions at all, he goes and clicks and highlights the section of town, and he counts the students. It's really phenomenal.
It's a lot of power for planning on things like this. You can easily do some calculations. And that tells me that as far as a middle school level goes, I mean, I assigned that to Alamo because we pulled the Paul Bro zone out of that and brought them to the other side of the thruway. But if you're looking at 60, you may want to look at assigning that to Broussard. School's further away, though, because now you got Camellia Boulevard, so it's pretty easy to loop around, pick that up, and run them over. You took a couple of bus loads. So that's one reason, that was part of the logic with putting that into Alamo. But Alamo also has a very high population. Problem is I don't have any other middle school to go to other than Alamo, Agri-Martin, or Broussard. Now, we could put them at Agri-Martin.
Lafayette Middle?
And run them on down there. I mean, that is an option.
What's the capacity at Lafayette Middle?
Lafayette Middle, if I remember, what, 550, 600?
That's it? I thought it was a little bigger than that.
One time we had portables and stuff. I think of some of those.
I know they're down at like 420 or something right now, right? Or 370 or something like that.
Let's see, Lafayette Middle currently has 465.
Okay.
That's the capacity of 465.
I'm not going to.
No, that's what the current enrollment. You know about what the capacity is, Joe? You have a feel for Lafayette Middle?
Hold on.
Agri-Martin might be more difficult to get to than Broussard Middle.
It would probably make more sense. It just you're going to have to route them through traffic either way.
I was going to say they got to go down College Saloon to Ambassador.
Yeah, there's no escaping the traffic on that end of town. That may be something
Ain't
that
that
may
the
want to
truth?
come back to, you know, as we take a look at how the you know, how the zones might play out, because the high school zones probably would fit in that fairly well.
Lafayette Middle would probably be about 600, and you might have to add a portal.
This is all 60 kids. I mean, it's. I don't want to make it sound like 60 kids doesn't make a difference, but it's you know, solving those kinds of problems at 970 with the portables at Alamo. We need a lot more than that.
Mr.
So
Hepburn,
what is the, just real quick, is the zone population at Alamo going to be around like just under 300? Is that what it ended up being? Because that's like 220 right now,
400,
right?
450 kids maybe over there at.
So almost half of it will be zoned?
Yeah, and I could be off on that, but it's quite a bit of the population, and that 970 does include that
that kind of segues into my question. My question is, have you considered or looked at if we made, I mean, Alamo and Edgar Martin are fairly close to each other. Have you considered making Alamo 100% school of choice, which will allow it to grow, and then distributing the zoned kids among Edgar Martin? Well, you just said there's probably 400 zoned kids, so that would I would assume Edgar Martin could take more than 425, but I don't.
It's not a topic I've talked with staff about, but I see some gears turning on the other side. I don't know if it's.
Well, I mean, it's in my zone. At least Alamo's in my zone. Edgar Martin is right on the edge of my zone, and it's always kind of baffled me that Alamo was busting at the seams and Edgar Martin didn't have any temporary buildings at all. Actually, Edgar Martin had empty classrooms.
Yes.
So we have Alamo busting at the seams with, you know, just about 1 out of every 2 buildings is temporary, but Edgar Martin had empty classrooms.
Mr.
And you
Knezik,
could walk from one to the other.
I would point out that they just told me that Edgar Martin has 10 portable classrooms, and I think about 25 seats per classroom. So that they said capacity right now is 700 seats. That would reduce it down to about 450 if you remove the portables. So just to your point, while you're doing the math in your head, that there are portables that those empty classrooms, portable classrooms, could be portable classrooms.
Got it.
Now, just looking at that Alamo zone on the east side of the river, you know, if it went to Edgar Martin or what have you, the heavy purple line is the high school line, so that would go into Como, so you wouldn't have a split in that particular case. So all of Martin, as of right now, all of Edgar Martin goes to Como under Plan 2A, version 2 on the high school plan. Mr. Santana at the last meeting, and we got together here a couple of days ago, he had brought up the area on the side of Pinhook about making a change on that with the elementary. So I'll make that change to correspond with the high school and the middle school as well, because it is as part of the elementary Plan 2 version 2. That's something we may want to consider if we're going to look at a plan alternative. Whatnot is take that east side of the river and just keep Alamo on one side and keep Edgar Martin on the other side.
Well, when we have really popular schools of choice, for instance, Myrtle Place would be a good example, and we can control the capacity of the school and say, look, Alamo, this is a school of choice, but it has a limit of 600 kids. When we get to 601, they're really, you know, it's difficult when you have a school of choice and zoned kids. You can't necessarily regulate the kids in zone and the fluctuation with the kids in zone. So I know it makes it difficult for staff to plan for that fluctuation at the beginning of the year.
Mr. Heffernan.
Yes.
The presentation you're giving, are you comfortable with the numbers that you're giving us? I know this is present enrollment. Are you comfortable with the numbers that we're looking at?
By and large, I am. There's still a few little areas that still, if I have a little more time, I probably would make some tweaks to it just to try to get those numbers a little bit more in line. We kind of accelerated the timeline, whereas the board wanted to move on this sooner than later. If you remember, our original timeline was probably setting up final adoption sometime in late November or December. Now we're looking at October, November. You know, as I go through it, look at it a little bit, staff's been giving me some updated numbers. In fact, probably we're just, Annette and I were just going over some numbers. These numbers are based on what we're in the database around the 12th of September. Now we're coming up to our official October 1st counts. We may have some kids that are in these numbers that actually didn't show up. So in some respects, some of these numbers may actually be overstated. I think it probably would behoove us to let me get the new numbers based on the official October 1st count. We're only looking at a few days from now. Re-geocode it, reprogram it, and see how these numbers change before we really nail down the zones. I kind of hate to take these baby steps, but we're trying to move things along and we're getting narrower, and we're getting closer and closer. But before I come and say, okay, this is what my recommendation is, I think these are good, these are set, I think we probably need to make sure that October 1st count's going to correspond with the numbers that I'm showing you. Because she had showed me some numbers on the high school side that if those numbers are holding true in the database today versus the numbers that this was generated from the database in September, then we've got a pretty significant difference between the two that we're going to need to reconcile. And I think that if we're having that many on the high school side, we probably have that many on the elementary and the middle. So some of these numbers may come down. So we're no use making moves to bring numbers down when they already come down by themselves.
I agree that the public's already aware of the zoning, of the rezoning. So I think taking time for us to do it right the first time would be beneficial to everyone, instead of rushing into making all of these changes, and then we'll have to come back next year, as someone alluded to make some adjustments, try to get as right as we possibly can the first time. So I know a lot of board members want to get rid of portable buildings that we've got at our schools, and I totally agree. And when we talk about building new facilities, I guess elsewhere, it was sort of let's do this side as much as we can for what we've got. Then we move on to something bigger to try to accommodate the growth.
Mary?
I just wanted to go over like any DSEG rules or anything of the like that we have to follow while we're rezoning, and just go over that. Just let everyone know that what we have to follow and how that process works, if any.
A lot of these zones that we're looking at from current that created 50 splits, were a result of changes we had to make for our DSEG case. The DSEG case, we got provisional unitary status at the end of 2004 and were granted full unitary status in 2006. That ended all federal and court oversight, returned local control back to the board, back to the locals. So there's no courts that we have to go to get their blessing or run anything by. This is all the decisions that the locals make. Now, what we want to do is try to make sure that we don't create any situations that that generates some litigation. If we were just really trying to basically, it's not so much segregate, because you can't use race anymore as your primary assignment. We had to at the DSEG because the case was filed in the 60s based on race, so it had to be settled on race. But there have been numerous court cases and a Supreme Court case out of Washington, Seattle, Washington, that said you cannot use race as your primary criteria to make school assignments. That's why you see so many school districts using economically disadvantaged or free and reduced. So we don't want to do anything to overload a school if there's other ways of doing it without doing so with economically disadvantaged. You will have some additional ones with these plans, though, in Mr. Broussard and Mr. Chasson's district, but I think staff is preparing for that, to be able to address the additional students coming in that may need some help. But as far as the DSEG case, that's gone. It's 10 years past now. So that's why this actually should have been done a while back. We were kind of waiting early on to see what effect schools of choice may have on trying to relieve some of the overcrowding at some of the schools. But our studies have shown that when we open up parish-wide schools of choice, the students come fairly equally from all over the parish. So it's not like the schools you really want to get relieved all go to a school of choice. It's fairly even across the parish. And I've parsed those out too, by the way, based on the codes that the staff gave me. So one day, maybe next time we meet, I can show you what the distribution is. If you want to see what your Arts Academy student distribution is, I can show it to you on the map about all the dots and those that are in the world language programs, things like that, just so you get an idea. Free and reduced, I can show you what the distribution on that. I think a lot of people will be surprised just how diversely scattered, I guess you could say, those students that are on free and reduced are. A lot of people think they're only in a certain part of the parish. They're not. They're all over. You got a couple of hot spots, but they're still all over. It's a fairly widespread distribution. So there's a lot of things that the system can tell you.
Mr. Hefner, you brought up a point that I emailed you on today, and I wanted to talk to the board. One of my friends, John Newman, he's actually in the audience today, brought up what I thought was a very good point, is that in our analysis, and I don't want to say cloud, but let's just say the word cloud, the term free and reduced lunch. And he brought up a good point that there's a large financial difference between someone who is on free lunch and somebody who is on reduced lunch. And imagine taking a school that's on 30%, and I'm just going to throw this hypothetical out there. So 30% free lunch, and we turn it into a 70% free lunch, is a huge change. And that one of the things we might want to look at in our analysis is not only free and reduced lunch, because the threshold, and again, I don't have those numbers in my head, but I think it's about double. So someone on reduced lunch makes at least double, if not more, than someone on free lunch. That I think that's just something we want to make sure that we pay attention to. Is there is a difference between free and reduced lunch, someone on free lunch and someone on reduced lunch, and that as a part of this analysis we should be aware of where we may be increasing or decreasing the population of someone that is in the free lunch category. And not that it'll change the zoning, but it may change our how we staff the school. So, thank you.
And along those lines, if I may, Annette and I were also talking before the meeting. The state, the last couple of years now, they have a formula that they use to determine socioeconomic disadvantaged students. And we have probably some issues now with the free and reduced numbers because we're offering free lunch to anybody at a number of our schools. So if we go through and we re-geocode the student database based on October 1st, we're probably going to shift over to using that state's socioeconomic disadvantaged numbers. What I'll have to do, though, to make sure we compare apples to apples, is apply that to the numbers I generated last year, on last year's enrollment, using the ED numbers, so we can make sure that we have an accurate comparison to the extent that we can. So, Annette, I don't know if you want to give them a quick take on that, or if that covered it.
No, you actually covered it very well. You listened well when I was speaking. Thank you. The 19 schools last year that went on to the low socioeconomical status, every student gets free breakfast, free lunch. So basically, those 19 schools, we did away with the free and reduced status. My concern was looking at a school like Alice Boucher, looking at the number that was listed on our demographics here for free and reduced lunch, I think was 74%, and I know for a fact what we're still currently using is in the 90+%. So that's why I was concerned that we make sure we do get updated figures on that.
Because you're not collecting the free and reduced information
Correct.
now. So as
they do not turn
those
in
students
any
come
forms.
in, we're not picking up that data.
Correct.
So actually our data can be skewed. So we're going to use the state code. And that way we're actually going to be consistent with the state code. The number of students that go to the arts program, I am showing at 714 students going to Alamo that the student database had coded going there under the arts program. Some of those could be living in the Alamo zone, though. But the ones that are coded for going to Arts Academy, that's what the student database is showing as far as the enrollment goes.
So does that mean that
you take 714 from 970, and it'll give you a fairly close idea?
And I'll bet this is not a significant number, but does that mean that, because you explained to me how you coded them into this little imaginary block right here, does that mean you might be double counting those in-zone students tagged as art students?
Should not be. The way the student database is set up, they should not be double counted. Because I'm actually using student ID. I'm going by individual student, and when I aggregate, as opposed to just numbers by the code, I'm actually using student record by record. It shouldn't be double counted. However, we may have issues with they were on the books in early September and they're no longer on the books October 1st, and that's we're going to try to take care of that. If the board doesn't mind taking a little bit more time on this, then that's what I would prefer to do. Get those numbers a little bit closer. We're getting close every time, but and that's why I don't want parents to jump to the assumption when they see the maps that, oh my goodness, I'm going to be changed. Let me call my board member. Let me call staff. Whatever. Some of these things, some of the changes we had in 2 might come back out, might come back to 1. But there will be some changes. I just wouldn't panic yet until, get really concerned until we get these things finalized and get them down a little bit closer. Because this is a process, and I've done this in a lot of other parishes. This is a process. And what may be in a plan today could come out of that plan a week from now. So it's not something to the temptation is to get upset about it if you see a potential change, but I wouldn't get to that point yet. So I just want to reiterate that.
I believe the saying is, don't panic. There will be plenty of time for that later.
That's correct. that's a good way of doing it. But for each of the schools that we have these programs, I have created a little student census block that allows me to parse that out. So when we have things like that, I can figure out what it is. Any other questions? I was waiting for it. Okay.
High school.
All right, hang on.
Please.
Let me switch over.
Now I will ask you many of the questions that I have received.
Okay.
And hopefully we can address the concerns that I've heard and hear the rationale, because I've told everyone that while I may not agree with it, while they may not agree with it, there is a logic. I promise you that, because if there's nothing else that I've been impressed with this process is that nothing is arbitrary. Everything is based on demographics, where people live, things like that. So
the numbers kind of tell us what we need tonight.
Right. So the first question is the 2170. That includes the 350 performing arts students that are not zoned for Lafayette High, correct?
That includes, yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
So some of that number in there also may include some that live in the Lafayette High zone, but because they're coded to the program, I have them at the Lafayette High census block.
Okay. Are you able to show us what the middle school numbers are? Like, I tend to think that that's at least at the high school level, especially taking into account that we voted to move the Performing Arts Academy, that obviously I know not all of them will go to Como. Like, I know some of them are zoned for Karen Crow and Northside and Acadiana that won't go to Como to follow the program. But the Como number here is similarly understated by the 300-something out-of-zone Performing Arts Academy students, yes? So are we able to see what the middle school numbers are for the high school zones? Is that too difficult for you to pull
The
up?
high school zones?
Yes.
As they are right here?
As they are right
I can
there.
program that. Just give me a second. I'll just go ahead and I'll just do the
And I'll explain the
based
question,
on-
because one of the concerns that I've heard is that by removing the Lafayette High zone, both in Broadmoor and south of the mall, but leaving so much in the Como zone that has room to develop, that we really risk, to Mr. Hidalgo's point, that people are still moving into the southern end of the parish, we really risk overfilling Como on the front end and being right back here 2 or 3 years from now saying, well, you know what, you guys can go back to Lafayette High, which, to the point again where you said it kind of rolls up, where zones need to reach south to bring kids northward, whether they be in the southern end of the parish and go to Edgar Martin, be in the central part of the parish and go up to Lafayette Middle. It seems the opposite is happening at Lafayette High, where we are not reaching south to bring kids northward. We are, in fact, taking kids northward and bringing them down into Lafayette High, because we're zoning people out behind the mall, but then we're zoning people in north of Cameron Street. So just, these are the concerns and the questions that I've been getting.
And that alludes to what I mentioned earlier about Southside High School zone is really the driving force behind this, and then trying to align the middle and the elementary with that is that Southside took all their kids from Como. So Como has to come in and pick up Lafayette High, and the area that was most reasonable from transportation standpoint and whatnot was coming in picking that area up along Johnson Street, the Edgar Martin zone. The first plan picked up some of the Edgar Martin zone, but not all of it. The second plan picked up all of the Edgar Martin zone and eliminate a split. That also brings in some of the changes on the north end, where Karen Crow was picking up some of the north side, Acadiana was coming in some, and Lafayette High was coming in and picking up some of the north side. So north side picked up its area using the railroad tracks and the thruway as its primary line. Trying to make those adjustments a little bit is where the area that Acadiana was coming in, we moved the Lafayette High zone up to pick up some of that, to get the Acadiana numbers down a little bit, but also to pick up Lafayette Highs just a little bit to accommodate that. Now, of course, that brings Carencro down a little bit, which I don't have really a lot of place to go other than back to Northside, perhaps in a different part of the parish. So that is where some of those dynamics are kind of taking place. It's that shuffling, it's that domino effect. To say that it's set in stone, it's really not so much. I mean, there are some parameters that we have to work within. But that was the general logic that I followed. Southside took Como. Como's going to take part, and Como's actually going to lose some of the north side too, so it gets a little bit of a double whammy. So it's picking up Lafayette High. Lafayette High is losing some of the north side, but moving a little bit more, pick up a little bit of Acadiana, and keeping Acadiana's numbers within reason. So that's kind of the
question about middle schools though in the zone.
Well, no. I was using the middle schools as an example, but to his point and to the point of the people that I've received emails and phone calls from, is that earlier we said certainly the idea is to reduce the population at Lafayette High. I think everyone can agree that there are too many students there, and he says that Como has only one place to go is to pick up Lafayette High zone. Well, in June we moved 350 students from Lafayette High to Como. Is my point. The secondary point is that there are people in Lafayette High zone that are very likely equidistant from Lafayette High to Como. It's probably 6 one way, half dozen another as far as distance goes, that are being zoned out in favor of other students who are being zoned in particular, and out, to his point, north of Cameron Street or north of Willow Street between the interstate. Those students are probably pretty easy to get to Carencro. And probably easier than Lafayette High, even though they may be closer, because you can go straight up University, hang a right, you're right there, right? Right, those were Acadiana High students. So I think there's some questions from people who are being zoned out of Lafayette High School, wondering, okay, so I get that we want to reduce the numbers, but why are you taking me out and adding students in? Is their question. Mm-hmm. And that's I think the answer that.
That's part of that shifting up.
Yeah.
Part of that rolling up. To get to your numbers, though, for example, on the Como zone, you had asked about the number of middle school students, grades 6 to 8, that are within the Como zone, and the answer to that is 867. Of course, they're split up among numerous middle schools, but you got 867 students in that area. If you wanted to do Lafayette High would be the next one you wanted to look at. Okay.
Before he moves on, I want to add a little bit to what Mrs. Santani said. First of all, I'm getting calls from some of those same folks, and they geographically live much closer to Lafayette High than they do Como. And one of the things I want to mention that you all might not be aware of is that we can talk about whether or not we think the population is going to continue to grow down there or not, but I can tell you what we can't think about is that last year Como had 1,936 students. Today's enrollment is 2,051. So to me, we ought to use the same logic we're using for Southside, and we're underfilling the school, knowing that growth is coming, and so that we won't have to rezone, the capacity will be there. And I think we should consider the same logic at Como, especially knowing what Mrs. Santani has said. I don't have the facts on this, but Mrs. Santani has said this much too often, that his area of town, they're not moving into his area of town. So to me,
I didn't say that. I just said they didn't have kids.
Well, I've heard you say it a few times, but regardless, they are moving in to the Como zone, and they will be moving in to the Southside zone, and so hopefully we can use the same logic, knowing they're coming. I mean, they came this year. That's a lot. That's a big jump.
Okay, on your Lafayette High School, you have 1,468 students living within the high school 2A lines. And of course, they're split between some different middle schools as well.
And Southside?
Southside? Southside is 1,007. I know you're going to ask for Carencro. And Northside, I'm just saying.
I mean, you might as well.
just soon give it to you. Karen Crow, 762. I'll give you Acadiana's next. Acadiana is 944. And for Northside, we have 1,465.
Any other questions?
Well, I was going to say I had one more question, but I couldn't tell if my light was on or not. And so there's, would you say 16, a little under 1,700 when you showed us the change between the Plan 1 and Plan 2 maps at Lafayette High? Was that
Lafayette High?
Is that what it went down to?
Let's see.
Was it 16?
Yeah, it was a couple hundred difference. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
I had that. I don't know. That's that one right there. It was basically the same without the Edgar Martin. That's on a different setup that I had. I can jump to that real quick. Let's see. That one. It's a high school right now as it is. 2170 is what we have right now. And that's with the reduction. That's putting all of Edgar Martin into Como. There it is right there. Let me do this real quick because it's probably going to be easier just to tell you what those numbers are in that part of the Edgar Martin zone. Let me check something here. I may have already put that together. Okay, no, that was, I thought I had it on another view, but let me go back to my other one. As you can see, I generally work through a lot of different plans. All right, that area that we had moved basically is this area here with in that taking that middle school zone and reassigning it, or making that whole zone whole. Okay, roughly we are looking at 187 high school students in that area that's shaded in red. That was the main change with the between plans 1 and 2. So that brought 187 out of Lafayette High and into Como. If you put them back into Lafayette High, then that's where you come back roughly 2357 for Lafayette High and 1113 for Como.
But add subtract 350 from each, like the performing arts.
Correct.
Right.
That's
So
without making the adjustment for performing arts, which will go into place next year. So you kind of manually cover that.
Yeah. I guess the point that I would make on this is that I would hesitate to move too many into Como. To Mr. Broussard's point earlier about yes, we could come back later and do this and spot rezone it and make an adjustment 2 years down the road, but I would prefer to get this as right as possible the first time. And I think Como we run a real risk of putting too many kids into Como High, and
Okay.
That's my point.
All right. Well, we'll just keep that point in reserve, and we'll work up those new numbers based on the October 1 counts, and we'll see if these numbers end up changing. And then if they do, then we'll discuss it and figure out which way we want to go with it. But I think it's a point well taken. You don't want to have to do something now and then have to undo it a year or two from now. You want to be able to move forward and make those spot zones. You don't want to have to undo a mistake that was made on the front end. And that's why I don't mind taking a little extra time doing this, because it's very important to get it done right the first time. And next to that, it's very right to implement it right, because that's where it can really cause a lot of hard feelings with the public out there, as if it's not implemented properly.
Yes, sir, Mr. Latchley.
Mr. Hefter, if you don't mind, if we could go back to the middle school zone on a couple of the emails and phone calls I've gotten today with the transition of the Johnson Street west from Edgar Martin to Scott Middle. And exactly how many students will be moving.
Okay. Let's see, we can figure this out fairly quickly. Yeah, it's picking up the whole thing. Let's see. Okay, I'm gonna have to do it by hand, so just bear with me for a minute. Take that off. Let me get my little markers in here. All right, that's not the one I want. Give me a second. That's the one I want. Okay, this area here was the area that was going to Edgar Martin, so we are going to figure out what we have on our 6 to 8s. Okay. The area highlighted in red, the exception of that. These are following the current boundaries right now for Edgar Martin on the other side of Johnson Street. And you're looking at 146 6 through 8 students. So if they were assigned to Edgar Martin would be 571, and Scott Middle would be down to 389 if they were if they kept going to Edgar Martin. It was the only place I could really reasonably go to keep the lines together, to go and try to build Scott back up, keep Edgar Martin reasonable, knowing that that area is going to matriculate to Acadiana High when they leave. So that was the logic behind that.
So that eliminates a split zone.
Yes.
So it's
Because currently, right now, it's a split zone. And even under Plan 1, it was a split zone.
right.
But once we made the adjustments for some of the other programs and whatnot, that brought those numbers down a little bit more for Scott. Main thing with Scott, though, lost 5th grade because it's now west side, and the area north of the interstate is now going to Karen Crow rather than Scott. So those are the two dynamics at play, bringing Scott's numbers down.
Now, has Scott's district shrunk any to the east, or it just shrunk from the north?
From the north.
Just the north?
Mm-hmm. It still goes out to the parish line with Acadia.
West, okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
I'd like to look at elementary. We hadn't looked at that yet.
All right.
Well, we hadn't asked any questions about it yet.
I know you looked at it.
Yeah. Mr. Hefner, I don't know if you want to multitask or not. You want me to ask you a question while you're working, or you want me to wait?
Sure. No, I can do.
You use the 5-year.
You know what they say about multitasking, but okay.
If I understand right, you use the 5-year projection on future growth in the communities as it relates to, you know, the future population.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we haven't done the one yet for here because we've been dealing with the zoning, but that's on the books to do.
Oh, okay, to do. So these numbers don't include
no,
any growth. Okay.
Not yet, other than just a general feel.
Okay.
You know, being familiar with the community.
Well, sure. What I want to first question I want to ask you about, Senator Scarlett, you went through that zone, and you were making a couple of comments about the numbers, and I agree with what you said, that Gaulet can handle the 930 kids, but it's really not much room for growth in the area that is growing that fast. And I think one of the major reasons, other than the new South Side, we're looking at rezoning is because of the growth in population in certain areas and the amount of students in certain schools as opposed to others. So again, I'd like to try to find a way, if at all possible, to not overfill schools we know are going to continue to grow. And you and I spoke, and I'm well aware that it's really hard to do much here because, again, keeping the lines out of neighborhoods, you're grabbing 150 to 200 students at a time.
Right.
But I want to throw something out, and I want to see what the superintendent has to say about it, what you have to say about it. I know the original Drexel map had what ended up being, about 1,300 students, which we know is too much for Drexel. But in that 1,300 was 5th grade, which included 134 students. So if 5th grade were to stay at Broussard Middle one more year, next year, that would reduce the 1,300 down for sure. And then we also know that some of that area that is north of Ambassador, which the first plan you brought back was the Ambassador Caffrey for middle school. So I'm just using that as an example because that was the line. We also know that there are quite a few students in that area between Ambassador, Bonin, Camellia, and Verot, it looks like, maybe. Yeah, Verot. But there's a really good split point, which is La Nouvelle Road. And so I think there are about 166 students represented on the northern part of La Nouvelle Road.
This area here.
Yes.
We had
I think
discussed.
that's the numbers you and I spoke about.
That's correct.
So if you took Catherine Drexel's 777,
893, right? Well, yeah.
771.
Yeah.
That would be the number. And if you backed 134 out of that, keeping fifth grade, so there are 134 fourth graders now at Catherine Drexel that would go on to fifth grade.
Yeah.
Instead of staying at Catherine Drexel, if they moved on to Broussard Middle, that would reduce to 771. How would the numbers look for you in that one area I just mentioned, north of La Nouvelle? And Dr. Aguilar, how do you feel about Broussard Middle retaining fifth grade for one more year?
I'm obviously concerned about overfilling capacity at Drexel. If we had a solid plan and we were addressing future needs, I don't see a problem leaving the fifth graders at Broussard Middle at least another year. It could actually be 2 years before a new facility would be operational.
Right. I know the numbers at Broussard Middle, though, Mrs. Centenni brought out earlier, are rather low now. We know we get it. We know it's going to change, but right now they're low. So a year or two max is a plan, you think?
I agree.
Okay.
I talked to Mr. Mouton earlier, Broussard Middle. He says can easily hold 650.
And he would be at 4 something, right?
$576, right? Currently $576. Next year $494.
Yeah. So another 130 students he could easily accommodate. The question is, he could easily accommodate. Okay.
He said he could. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and pre-K 5, there's 166 in that area shaded in red. And that's what you and I had discussed the other day.
So if we backed 134, so that would be essentially, tell me if I'm working this right, that would essentially be putting somewhere around another 35 to 40 students at Catherine Drexel, over and above the plan. So 771 plus, let's just round up to 40.
Well, not all 166 are going to go. Wait, we putting them in Drexel? We putting them in Broussard Middle?
Drexel. This is elementary.
Why are we talking about Broussard Middle?
Because Broussard Middle.
Oh, even the fifth graders.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
See how many fifth graders we got. Here. 139 fifth graders. So if they didn't go to Drexel, and they stayed at Broussard, then you could drop that number by 139.
The 166.
Yeah.
Right. So it makes more sense. Yeah, no.
I think it's something to look at.
Okay. I'd like you to consider that, because I think if everything does come to fruition like we've already talked about and supported, and another school is built anywhere in that area, it doesn't matter if it's on the Section 16 property. It could be way up where Dawn's district, Miss Morris district meets, the plantation area. It doesn't matter. The idea is the rezoning for a new school, or the zoning for a new school, it's pretty safe to say it'll come from around that area. So we'll move kids this year from one school to another, and then in a year or two, be looking at moving them again, and I would like to try to eliminate that.
Yeah, let me explain the number just so we don't have any misconception there.
Sure.
All right, if we assign this area in red to Drexel,
Yes.
it would bring Drexel to 937. Of that 937, though, 139 are fifth graders. So it would be 937 minus 39.
Yes, sir.
The red area has 20 fifth graders in it.
Okay. Okay.
So what you're suggesting we take a look at is keeping the fifth graders over at district-wide, keeping them over at Broussard, which would mean that you're going to reduce the overall number by 139 at Drexel and add 139 to Broussard.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. I think it's something we could probably take a look at.
Thank you.
Because it is part of the problem. It's as we discussed earlier this year, it's a high growth area, and you're already strained with capacity in a lot of these, and it's really how you split the baby.
Right, and again, another positive here is that it takes 166 students off of Ernest Gallet, and there's that opens up more window of opportunity between Ernest Gollette and, you know, other surrounding.
Yeah, that'll bring Gollette to 764.
Okay.
Which gives it, I mean, its design capacity was 750. Of course, you know, it's exceeded that. Their numbers are
990 something.
Yeah, let's see. Ernest Gollette right now is 982.
982.
So, yeah, these numbers are a little bit lower than they currently have right now, but you don't have any room for growth, and you already got portables out there. We figured 5 years when we made these plans back in 98, 99. Figured 5 years they were going to need portables. They'd hit their 750 and they'd need them, and it was pretty darn close. It's probably a year early for Gollette, and the others. Burke still hadn't grown quite to the extent that we expected, but Gollette certainly has. So yeah, that would give it more room for growth.
Any other questions? I would accept the comments from the audience. Say a couple of minutes, and the reason I'm being stingy is because this zone is not in stone yet. So let's not comment too much about something that may change.
Hi, Ella Orsama. Whenever the board or Mr. Hefner puts together the different scenarios, can he also include the cost for transportation with the different scenarios? And y'all were talking about a whole bunch of different, what if you move this, what if you move that? When he does put that together, can he put the cost for transportation with these? Because one of the reasons that the school board decided to rezone was transportation was a big cost, and they wanted to help with that. Also overcrowding in schools. And can that be done for these different scenarios 5 years down the road? Because you probably know the number of people in the households and stuff. So what if they have 0 to 4 down the road? They're going to be going to schools. How will that affect our schools 5 years down the road? Even 10 years, if you can predict that. Because as y'all have said, this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. I mean, we don't do this often. It's been needing to be done for many years, and I do applaud this board for taking the bull by the horn and trying to do something to help our school system. You know, not everybody's going to be pleased with what you come up with, but if you do it in the spirit of the greater good for all, most people, you know, can live with that. I might have misunderstood, so if I did, y'all please correct me. I don't understand how the school board would be able to secure funds to build new schools and not be able to secure funds for adding on to existing schools. Is there room to add on at the existing schools? And what happened to the plans that were approved to either remodel or add to Drexel, Plantation, and I can't remember the name of the other school right now, but there were 3 of them that were approved to be add-on. It might be cheaper, you know, is it cheaper to add on to the existing schools that we have? Do we have the room to do that? Because y'all were talking about building another elementary school. And if we're going to continue to have Butler buildings, I'm begging y'all, I don't have any kids in the school system, but I'm begging y'all, find money to build walkways so these kids do not have to walk in the rain, please. I mean, that's uncalled for. And this just popped in my mind right before I came up here. Is there any type of program that could be used in our school system that you're using now that would be easily relocated to another school when the numbers at a school are down and you know, like this school is full right now, but 5 years down the road it's not? Is there any program that we can move without costing any money to move it or costing money to add things at a different school? You know, I'm not familiar with everything we offer, but it's just a thought. Thank y'all and good luck.
Thank you. I think one of the first comments that Mr. Hefner said was that the rezoning is going to substantially decrease our transportation costs. I'm certainly not going to hold him to a number. I mean, I don't think he has time or or we have the money to pay for.
Now, I don't have the data
Living
right now to be able to tell you that.
Cost,
I can tell you from a
it's millions of dollars, but
general standpoint, you should be able to save
generally
a
speaking.
number of buses, yeah.
Yes, sir. When you come up, state your name, please.
Mr. President, may I make one comment on the transportation?
Sure.
And this is the anecdotal, or the anecdote that I give every time. When I walk to work in the morning, I cross University on Oak Lawn Avenue, and I walk across Evangeline Street, and I walk across Cedar Crest and St. Antoine, and there are at least 4 different buses that go into that one neighborhood, because that one neighborhood is zoned for 4 different elementary schools. And so you can imagine that when we zone that neighborhood for one elementary school, there will be one bus going to one school instead of 4 buses going to 4 schools. And so I don't know the cost. I think it's about $80,000 a year is what we budget for each bus that we operate. But just that one little area, we're going to save 3 buses on the road. So that's an example of how we think about it from the non-contiguous elementary school zones and any zone splits that we may have across town.
You wanted to say something, Bruce?
Hey, Ms. Arsom, I don't know if you remember when we started this process, talking about it about a year ago. Mr. Hefner had brought up, or we had a presentation. Most successful school zones throughout the country look at rezoning at least every 5 years. Continuously rezoning, so that the public at least knows over the course, you have 2 or 3 kids over 12 to 15 years, there could be 2 or 3 rezoning cycles. Probably not as drastically as this, because it hasn't been done in so long. But I think if you want to continue to be a successful school zone, you need to look at implementing a plan to where you at least look at this every 4 to 5 years. And
yes, sir.
Yes, Carlos Harvin.
Look, get by the mic so we can hear you, sir.
Sorry. Yeah, Carlos Harvin. I'm a resident of District 3, and Elroy Broussard is my school representative. I want to thank Mr. Hefner for a lot of the hard work that has gone into this. And Mr. Broussard hosted a town hall for the district, and Dr. Aguilar was there just to talk about what these numbers would look like. I do want to commend trying to keep those numbers in the neighborhoods where the students live. And one thing that we looked at, the reason that Lafayette High has so many students there is because of that health academy. And we were discussing the possibility of duplicating maybe a second health academy at Northside High, which would draw a lot of students that live in that zone to stay in that zone, because so many students zoned for Northside or other districts for that matter go out of zone with school of choice. But if we could maybe increase the number of academies at our other schools, that might keep those students zoned for that district to stay in that district. So I just wanted to add that in there as a possibility. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments? Yes, sir.
Good evening. I'm John Newman. I'm District 8. Board Member Kniezek, he mentioned my my concern in general, and you know, from what I've seen, there's a correlation between the economic status of the student and their performance, and so the you know, the more economically disadvantaged they are, the more they tend to be behind, or the more remediation they would need. And so to me, it looks like the state has sort of blurred the numbers between free lunch and reduced lunch. And when you're looking at free lunch economically, you're looking at households from $0 to $30,000 for a family of 4. In the neighborhood, we have an after-school tutoring program. In our little neighborhood, we're looking at incomes of $12,000 or $14,000 based on 2010 census. Whereas reduced lunch, you're looking at between $30,000 and $45,000, and I believe the median household income in Lafayette is about $47,000. So reduced lunch is almost the average Joe in town, and then but that still gets the nomenclature of disadvantaged. So I would suggest, for example, if you had 50% of your students that were considered economically disadvantaged and they were at J.W. Falk, for example, that they would be significantly more economically disadvantaged. They would be free lunch, whereas if it was Woodvale, for example, and they were both at 50%, one would be reduced lunch, one would be free lunch, and one would need significantly more remediation. And so I don't know if it's possible, but I would really encourage to try to break those numbers out between people actually in poverty, you know, and that's 20% of our student population, as opposed to low income. That's my concern. Working with those kids, I realize they need extra remediation. They need, the kids we see, you know, they're a couple years behind, and so if you put them, aggregate them all together, I wonder if it would overwhelm the school. So that's my concern. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Bridget Derwin. I'm right in between District 8 and District 6. I just really wanted to thank you guys for taking the time to put this meeting on and allowing us to be here. Mr. Hefner, I know you mentioned several times it's about phasing into these plans. It's a process. Along with the phasing into this plan, and it's been so long since any changes, I would consider the students' feelings that are currently enrolled in high schools, currently enrolled in middle schools, and ripping them out halfway through their high school years, their middle school years, their elementary school years, where if you're going to phase into new programs, consider phasing as 8th graders into 9th grade, you know, 5th graders into 6th grade. That way, these children that have established their friends, their clubs, their livelihoods aren't being torn and tossed into a new school. It is devastating on a person. They don't get accepted like they are joining one club to another school. They lose out on things that they've established and built and worked hard for. So if you're going to phase, and if you're going to consider rezoning every few years like most successful schools do, consider how they rezone and how they phase into these new programs for the children's feelings, for their sakes, for the sakes of their little hearts. That was my main point. Just consider the kids.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Any other questions or comments? If Mike, you want to sum it up, or?
Yeah, we're just along those lines. You know, a lot of that happens with kids get separated when they're going from elementary to middle to high school, and that's one reason why one of our objectives is to eliminate as much as we can those split zones. That's what we call a split zone. We're going from the current situation, we have 50 split zones. So you have a lot of instances where these kids are not staying with their friends as they move through their school career. Went from 50, Plan 1 brought that down to 18, and right now Plan 2 is at 16 splits. So that mechanism that separates kids is being addressed now. So now more of them are going to be staying together as we formulate a plan. Plan 3 may be even fewer splits. But the other thing with regards to like juniors and seniors and middle school 8th graders and whatnot, that's going to be a policy decision on the board. Most school districts are going to take that up as part of their implementation process. So it's not necessarily germane to what I'm doing per se, but they'll do, a lot of them have senior privilege, junior privilege, that type of thing. So that'll be something that the board will be taking up as we move along on here.
If there are no other questions, I'm going to declare this workshop adjourned.